Hi, my name is Rob Earlham, Senior Developer Advocate here at Sitecore, and this is the next video in a series covering some of the key concepts for Sitecore Search. We recently implemented Sitecore Search on the developer portal, and the steps involved in that implementation are what we're covering in this series. Today, we're going to be taking a look at request extractors. They're an interesting concept that allow you to add an extra layer of processing to the URLs being crawled on your site. So, let's dive in. Now, when you set up a source based on a crawler, that could be a web crawler or an API crawler, they work on the same basic configuration flow. You set up a trigger, which will query your site and get back one or more URLs. And this list could be generated in a variety of ways. You may be crawling a sitemap or an RSS feed, you could be getting a response from an API, or you could be using a logic-based approach using a JavaScript request. Once that list is generated, these URLs are passed to the document extractors. These will then call the URLs, request the data from them, and that data is then used to build up the document to be stored in the index. And this works fine in a lot of scenarios, but sometimes you need an extra logic step when generating this URL list. A common example for this is when using cursor or token-based pagination. Here, that URL that's returned from the trigger, its body will contain information that's needed to generate the URL for the extra pages. So, in this scenario, we make use of a request extractor. This allows you to process each of the URLs returned from the trigger and use that data to generate further URLs which are also passed over to the document extractors. This is basically how you can implement recursion in your crawlers. Okay, so let's take a look at an example where we've used this on the developer portal. Okay. So I've loaded up the Customer Engagement Console, or the CEC, which is the search backend. And we're going to go and take a look at a source we've configured for the dev portal, which uses a request extractor. I'm going to click on the Sources tab on the left, and we're going to be working with the Sitecore changelog here. So if we take a look in here, this is an API crawler. So we're going to be giving it an API endpoint to start off for the trigger. We're going to take a look at how that's configured. We can copy that and let's just load it up in a new tab. If we look at the content here, this is a JSON response that's returning me all the data from the changelog. Well, not quite all of it. You'll notice at the top, we're actually limiting this to a page size of 10. If we look through here, we also have two different types of data. If you look first, we have this entries array. This is the first 10 results which match that first page of results. So each one of these objects is a single one of those 10, each one of them representing a single object in the changelog. The other type of data we have here is this end cursor. This is the special token we need to pass in to get page 2. What we can then do is we can pass in size 10 and the parameter for the token, and then that'll give us the next 10 from that token pointer. So we need to process this in two different ways. So let's hop back to search and see how we do that. I'm going to close this trigger. And the first thing we're going to look at is the document extractor, because that's really easy. We can see how we're processing that JSON response. We get each of those entries that's returned, and from there we basically build out this JavaScript object for the changelog, getting the different properties out of that JSON object. But what about that token? What about the cursor? Well, if we come out of here, this is where we start to work with a request extractor. Here you can see we're processing the same URL already. So that URL we had for the trigger is going to come into here, it's going to be called, and we're going to get a response in this response.body object. From here, we're going to check whether it has that end cursor property we saw earlier. If it does, we're going to generate a new URL, which is going to be the same as before, size equals 10, but we're going to add the cursor equals and then value from that cursor object passed back in the response. This is then returned out of the request extractor. That'll add a new URL into the list of URLs from the tracker, which will then cause the document extractor to process the 10 entries that are returned by this URL. But that new URL will also be passed back into this request extractor, meaning we can then go use that to go and get page 3, then page 4, then page 5, and so on until the end cursor is not present, which means we've reached the end. So you can see this is how you can start to implement recursion into your different sources. And if we come out of here, we can see we actually have 146 different entries stored for this source. So that means there must have been 15 different requests made to get all of this data, recursing through until we reached page 15, which only had 6 results and would have basically contained the final set of data and no tokens again anymore. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to follow the Discover Sitecore YouTube channel for future videos.